I recently reviewed Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, so now it's time to close off the saga with a reason why we didn't get Knights of the Old Republic 3. This is the last game I was really hyped for, like the "this game is gonna change my life" hyped. I was around 12 or 13 when its promotional campaign was going on, and I watched each cinematic trailer at least 50 times. And they're still really good, and there are very few cinematics that can compete with its quality and hype. But sadly, the game didn't live up to its hype. The game had the best story in an MMO at its time, especially when it comes to presentation. Like every quest was voice acted and had a storyline with choices. And in my opinion, it still holds that title. But the competition it has for that has grown a lot stronger. And living in the Star Wars universe as a Jedi, Sith, or bounty hunter is still an attractive prospect to me, even when Disney is trying everything it can to make it not. And the big positive is that it's free to play. That's a big upside with an MMO. And on the gameplay side, it's a tab target MMO, and doesn't do much to make it better than its competition. And in some aspects, the combat here is worse than Knights of the Old Republic 1. More on that later. For now, hope you enjoy and subscribe if you did. I started this review like 4 months ago, by the way. Premise. About 500 years after Knights of the Old Republic 1, the Sith Empire returns, starts a war with the Republic and the Jedi, and you can fight for either side as one of 8 classes, and you will learn how the world changed in those 500 years, and what happened to Revan and his buddies, and see how BioWare pissed on the legacy of Knights of the Old Republic 2. Gameplay PvE. Okay, tab target combat. Click an enemy or press tab and then push buttons and attacks will happen. You have a wide selection of abilities to use, but I only use about half of them. You can get through most combat encounters by just pressing 2 buttons. Challenging combat encounters are few and far between, and most of the ones I encountered were just hard because I was under-leveled. The reason it's so easy is because of the companions. They are basically pocket healers and they're very good at it. And they also deal damage. So sometimes in combat, if I needed to pee or something, I would just walk away mid-combat, and when I would come back, the enemies would be dead. Simply said, combat is a cakewalk. But there were a few bosses that I actually had to wake up for. So combat is easy, but does it feel good? Well, Jedi and Sith are cool because they have awesome force powers, and the cool lightsaber. The cool part about a lightsaber is that it cuts through an arm like butter, but in the game it's more like a kid pretending a flashlight is a lightsaber, because it doesn't seem to have any effect on enemies at all. You hit an enemy with a lightsaber and he just stands there going about his business. He doesn't dodge, recoil, or wince in pain. Nothing. There are a few abilities that do feel good because they affect the enemy, like the Force Choke. They get lifted into the air, they grab their throat, and you hear the choking sounds. And the Force Push. You can actually use it to throw people off ledges to their deaths. That's great. But for almost everything else, there's no impact. A huge part of satisfying combat is the effect your attacks have on enemies. And unfortunately, that is severely neglected here. I still remember that in early gameplay footage, they were gonna have Jedi fights look like an actual duel, and unfortunately that was just abandoned apparently. Knights of the Old Republic did this far better. In short, combat is pretty boring, and the enemies are whatever the opposite of noteworthy is. They are mostly soldier man, robot, miscellaneous alien animal, and occasionally some ghost or something. And most of the bosses aren't memorable either, at least when it comes to flashpoints. However, in the story, they are memorable because you interact with them a lot. And if they were in a cinematic trailer, like Malgus, a Sith Lord they brought back from the dead, because in my opinion he's their only real success in a memorable villain, apart from the Sith Emperor. At least the Sith Emperor in Knights of the Fallen Empire. Also, about the companions, they used to have different classes, so you had to play differently depending on the companion you had. Or you chose different companions based on what class and spec you were playing. But they changed it so that the companions could be whatever role you want. And kinda because of that, class roles don't really matter much anymore. Like healer, tank and DPS. You can run a flashpoint, which is a dungeon in this game, with everyone being a DPS, and it will be fine and no one will die, because they have these healing pickups. Class roles are a key part of the social element of an MMO, and that element isn't here. You have no reason to reach out to anyone for a group. You don't need them. You could take literally anyone or a companion. This is a single-player MMO. I never felt any reason to socialize with anyone, and I was never in a situation that encouraged it. Except maybe PvP, but the only thing that was said was "focus who," with the reply of "this guy." Roles might be important in PvP, but we will talk about that later. Speaking of changing roles, the new expansion allows you to change your class. Or, better said, it allows you to have a secondary class. So you can be a Sith Juggernaut with a single lightsaber and a Sith Assassin with a dual-bladed lightsaber. Except you can only change your class if you're a subscriber. And that fucking sucks. But they gotta make money somehow. That's why their Twitter account is always advertising mounts. The last thing about the combat, which also applies to basically everything in the game, is that I wish I could zoom out more. I feel a little too close to my character and I never got used to that. There are also raids in this game, and the game did nothing to guide me towards them. They are called operations. I haven't had the chance to play them, but I've seen gameplay, and they seem time-consuming and more interactive, with some mechanics to get your noggin jogging. I have raided in World of Warcraft and Destiny 2, and my reaction has always been, boy, I'm glad that's over. So I'm not putting much effort into seeking them out, but they're there if that's what you're into. As for flashpoints, aka dungeons, they're kinda just a mindless grind. Same as the open world combat. Okay, point A to point B. If you thought running around in KOTOR was bad, then oh boy, are you not gonna like this. Going from place to place in MMOs mostly sucks, with MMOs only recently coming out with ways to make it fun. Like Dragonflight in World of Warcraft, that was stolen from Guild Wars 2. And in the Old Republic vanilla and earlier expansions, it's a slog. But they did make it better than it was. You can get mounts earlier now than you could back then, and there are plenty of taxis around that will shorten a trip considerably so that it isn't so bad. However, there is something to be said about actually running around on a world and seeing it on the ground, and having it be connected. It makes the world feel more real, more immersive. In the recent expansions, they just teleport you to where the story is happening. And at that point, you don't have any connection to the place you're in. I think that's also just a problem when your MMO takes place in a galaxy with lots of planets. It's too big, with too many people, kinda impersonal. I don't know, I guess I just never really connected to any planet or environment I was in. Except that foresty place where you have Jedi training with Satil Shan. That place was nice, and Korriban is always cool. Getting shot down on mounts is annoying. I couldn't really fit that point in anywhere. And sometimes when I right click, my mouse goes into fuck. My screen will just turn 125 degrees in a nanosecond, and all I did was move my mouse like 5 millimeters. It's like some weird mouse acceleration or something. So yeah, gameplay hasn't aged great, and I don't think enough has been done to keep it up with the times. Story. The game has been out for a long time, and the story has gone through some improvements over that time. So I'll be doing some comparisons between the older and the newer stuff. Let's start with the presentation. Earlier in the game's life, cutscenes, or more accurately called, the dialogue scenes, had static camera angles and characters mostly just stood there and talked, and maybe acted out an animation. But in the later expansions, it's much better, with the camera moving in these panning shots and following the characters as they walk around. And characters will have well-animated duels in the cutscenes. Big battles, explosions, better character models that are a little more expressive. Most of the old characters just feel factory-made and bland. But later it's just much better overall. As for the story, it varies by expansion and class story. Like the Imperial Agent storyline and Knights of the Fallen Empire are really good. And then you have the Jedi Consular story and the Macab expansion. I watched a YouTube movie of Macab and just thought that I was glad I didn't play that. And I played the Jedi Consular story years ago, and I remember next to nothing about it, except that I was left disappointed. And I think it's because none of the companions resonated with me, but in every other class story I had at least one companion that I liked. And that's important because you're gonna be talking to them a lot. Dialogue choices. This is a BioWare game, so you only know the gist of what your character will say, but never exactly what he will say. The dialogue will say, "I hate you," but what your character will actually say is,
"A fucking worthless, brain-dead scumfuck bastard, pile of trash, mental dick face that should be gunned down in the street like the degenerate he is."
The main part you have to understand about the dialogue choices in this game is this. The narrative, the plot, is a straight linear line. And all those choices you make are just little branch lines that return to the straight line either very quickly or instantly. And often the case is that when you have a choice of killing someone, it wouldn't really matter because you were never gonna see him again anyway. And if you did kill him, it would be meaningless. Or at least it would make very little difference to the plot. Most of the choices you make will probably be down to whether you wanna roleplay as a light or dark side character. Choices almost meaningless. The actual dialogue is mostly just a lot of technology gobbledygook. Stuff like, we have to flux capacitor this beep and bop generator. And a lot of telling you what characters are gonna do and what methods should be used in stopping them. Just going over the plan of attack. A military debrief. This is of course not how all dialogue is, but it is a lot of it. But between those things are candid conversations with your companions, but I never feel like you're building a proper relationship with a character. You never go beyond the surface level. And nothing any character has said throughout my playtime has stuck with me. And that happened a lot in Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Immediately, I think of a few lines from the Knights of the Old Republic games, but I can't even think of a word from the Old Republic. But I can say that I really enjoyed Knights of the Fallen Empire / Throne. The voice the Emperor has is awesome, and his voice sticks with you. I can't remember what he said, but I remember what he sounded like. And the characters were at worst okay, except that they brought back the worst companions from the Imperial Agent and Trooper storyline, but you can kill them, which is great. The Knights of the Fallen Empire story sucked me in, and I wanted to see how we would win, how it would play out. It's their best story, and pretty good. And I liked the planet you were on, and I heard Knights of the Old Republic 2 music a few times, and that just makes me feel warm inside. I wrote a lot of notes for this review, since it took a lot of time, and here is one that sums up my feelings about Knights of the Fallen Empire. This is where the story actually got good for me. Performance was really good and characters looked distinct. It's done in chapters, which is nice to do it in bite-sized chunks. Let's move on to Onslaught and be a little quicker this time by using my notes. First part of Onslaught was pretty lame, but it got a lot better as it went on. Onslaught has this SWTOR thing, where if you're a Sith character, you can secretly be working for the Republic and vice versa. Personally, I just wanted to full-on switch sides, but unfortunately it's another one of those illusion of choice things, where the stuff you do won't really affect the story. Onslaught was okay, but it was a pretty big downgrade after Knights of the Fallen Empire. But it did have the final ending to the story that was started in Knights of the Old Republic 2. I'm gonna have to spoil a bit. Spoilers! Time to put our Star Wars dork hats on as I tell you the story from KOTOR to SWTOR. So in KOTOR 2, it was revealed that Darth Revan and Darth Malak went into the unknown regions of the galaxy, and they encountered something spooky, and were sent back to their side of the galaxy to weaken the Republic. And then, in SWTOR, it was revealed that the spooky thing was the Sith Emperor, a guy who has lived a very long time and is very powerful. After KOTOR 2, the Jedi Exile found Revan, and went with him to kill the Sith Emperor. They failed. The Sith Emperor kicked Revan's ass, I think, and the Jedi Exile got stabbed in the back like she was nothing. Thanks, BioWare. Thank you for pissing on the more interesting protagonist of the original games. Then in the Jedi Knight story, you kill the Emperor, but actually he comes back in Knights of the Fallen Empire. And you kill him again. And then in an update called Echoes of Oblivion, the last remnant of him is trying to take over the body of Satele Shan. And you go there to confront him, and then you and everyone he has wronged stand together to bring him down and destroy him forever. And it was nice, if a little cheesy, ending the stories that were started decades ago. Even if it wasn't the ending the original 2 games deserved. But when has Obsidian ever gotten what it deserved? You deserve so much more, my friend. Okay, now Legacy of the Sith, and then wrapping this up. It opens with some battle on Manaan, and it is pretty boring. But the expansion gets way better when you finally start chasing Malgus, who escaped from Sith captivity and is probably up to something bad. The planet Elam was pretty cool and a good looking environment. I think it's important to bring it up that the later environments look really good. And in patch 7.4 they are bringing a graphical update to the older environments, which is much needed. But what is even more needed is making older character models look better, especially the player character. Anyway, from chasing Malgus you get introduced to this Twi'lek Jedi and then her brother, and seeing them, they are so detailed. I wish every character was like that. But then the Malgus stuff ties into the Mandalorian Civil War because the Twi'lek brother is a Mandalorian. And the Twi'lek Jedi has a holocron from some ancient Sith called Darth Null. That's the MacGuffin you are chasing. And you're uncovering the mystery of Darth Null's technologies and what Darth Malgus wants with them, or what he wants overall. We capture Malgus, and my favorite moments in this expansion are talking to him in his prison cell. He's a good character, I like him, but I'm pretty invested in finding out what Malgus is planning. Too bad this is an MMO. And the story is currently unfinished and is delivered piece by piece in patches. So you play the story, get invested, and finish what is currently released and stop playing. And then you get to finish it months later when you've forgotten everything. Yeah, this is my big dislike about MMO storytelling. The newest update is set in Voss. And that was always my least favorite planet. Actually, I hate it. And I still hate it. But as for storytelling, they actually switched over to something that's more like the Knights of the Old Republic dialogue box. And the player character doesn't have a voice anymore. And that's a little upsetting, because I like hearing the Sith warrior voice. I like voices that sound like a guy who swallowed razor blades a decade ago.
If I'm facing Republic forces, I can't guarantee there won't be collateral damage.
And it also just feels cheap compared to what it is regularly. It's not a good replacement, but luckily it does switch back. Anyway, where we currently leave off in the story, we are told that something big will happen. Something that will shake the galaxy. And I certainly hope so. Onslaught and so far Legacy of the Sith have been very underwhelming compared to Knights of the Fallen Empire. And I'm personally not a big fan of the player character being this big military commander that can rival the Empire and the Republic. I kinda miss when you were just a Sith Lord or a Jedi Knight that was part of this bigger thing. And I'd really like to get back to the war between the Sith and the Jedi. This Mandalorian Civil War is just not catching my interest. But I do want to find out what happens with Malgus's plans. If there is one thing I dislike about the story in Legacy of the Sith, it's that all of the Darth Null stuff ties into the Sith Emperor, and I feel like everything that happens in this game somehow ties back to the Sith Emperor, and I would really like to move on from him. He's dead. Are we gonna have to deal with every single thing he ever interacted with? Did he have a finger in every pie? If you level boost a character, then your decisions from other characters don't carry on, and you won't really know what your character did. I did a level boost after Knights of the Fallen Empire, and apparently my level boosted Sith Warrior did the opposite of what my decisions were. Oh well. Some parts of the story are really good and some parts boring. To tell you what kind of story to expect here, I would say it's like a good Clone Wars episode. Nothing thought-provoking, just mostly entertaining, with Knights of the Fallen Empire being the really good one. It's a McDonald's burger story, and I can't help but feel that the game being an MMO is limiting to the story. The PvP in the game is pretty dead, at least no one is taking it seriously. From what I've seen, there is no PvP community and the queues are very long. So much so that I have often just given up on getting into a match. From what I can see from reading online is that the developers have been severely neglecting PvP, and from what I've played, PvP was the only time where I was really actively playing the game. You know, I had to think about who I should be targeting and what abilities to use, but man, it seems kinda unbalanced. I spent one match just chasing a sorcerer. They had endless stuns to stop me from killing them and movement abilities so I couldn't catch up. And they were healing so much that nobody was dying. PvP is the only place where roles matter in this game, and the healer is overpowered. And the game does not handle a lot of players fighting in the same place very well. War Zones, the mode with like 8 players per team I think, is pretty laggy. It's unfortunate that the PvP is in a sorry state here, because I can see that potentially it could be very fun, but it needs some work. And they also have Starfighter, a spaceship combat mode that is pretty damn good. Except that there is an upgrade system, so people that have played it longer will just be stronger than new players. And with Star Wars Squadrons being out, I would just play that instead. PvP not good, but it could be very good with some love and attention. Also, please add queue timers to PvP and flashpoints. Thank you. Conclusion. The Old Republic is a game that is clearly showing its age. There are games where its age is part of its charm, like Knights of the Old Republic, but not this one. To me, this game has aged poorly, and they seem to be doing some work to update the game, like the graphical overhaul. But that's the wrong place to start. Graphics never matter as much as gameplay, and the gameplay here is pretty poor. For the most part, you don't have to think about what you're doing, and the combat has no impact. It feels behind its competition. This is the only game I can think of where I was dreading doing more combat and looking forward to cutscenes. Usually it's the opposite, and in a best case scenario, I'm enjoying both. 40% of the story is good, and the rest is boring or just okay. I did no approximate calculation for that 40%, but I feel like it's pretty accurate. If anything, I'm being generous. BioWare is handing development over to Broadsword. Change is scary, because things might get worse. But on the other hand, things might get better. I'm hoping that Broadsword will do a combat overhaul and bring this game into the modern era. But the cynic in the back of my head says, no, they will just keep pumping out these 2-hour stories every 4 to 6 months or so, and leave it at that. But hey, a man can dream. By the way, this game has crafting and strongholds, and I didn't really get into those. For crafting, you don't need to do anything, and your companions take care of it. You might get armor or a lightsaber crystal out of this. And strongholds are just player housing, and they have never interested me in any MMO. As for whether I recommend the game, well, I had to take a lot of breaks and play the game in bite-sized pieces. Because if I didn't do that, I would get pretty bored, and it's very time-consuming. Even in Knights of the Fallen Empire, I was getting bored, because the gameplay just wasn't fun. But I kept going because I wanted to see how the story would play out. So here is what I recommend. watch YouTube movies of the story, and if you really wanna be a Jedi, then play it on and off. I give the game. My name is Mr. EA, and I like money. Out of Mr. BioWare, please turn Knights of the Old Republic 3 into a money printing machine. Playing Star Wars The Old Republic makes me miss World of Warcraft. That's weird coming from a guy who made a video called "You Should Quit World of Warcraft." In a better world, we would have gotten KOTOR 3. This is not a good sequel to those stories. I kinda wanna pick another MMO to work on reviewing in the background for another 6 months, but it takes so long. But feel free to give me recommendations and I'll look into it. Until then, subscribe, like, and have an okay day.